Look at what I just pulled off one of my bell pepper plants. This is a Jupiter bell peppers. This is one of the largest Jupiter bell peppers I've grown, and I wasn't even trying to grow it. My pepper plants are supposed to be dormant, and I just pulled one of the largest Jupiter bell peppers that I have ever grown. And here's the other. These two bell peppers came off my plants just now. Plants that I'm supposed to prepare for overwintering. I couldn't even grow them like this when I was trying. When I leave them alone, look what happens. It's hilarious. Finding that bell pepper gave me a great idea. Why not make pepper steak? It's one of my favorite dishes. Now, the recipe that I found online called for flank steak. I don't have flank steak, but this will do. You also need onions and, of course, peppers, bell peppers. I mean, it wouldn't be pepper steak without peppers. I had a variety of colors: yellow, orange, and of course, green. And this is my Jupiter bell pepper that I got out of my garden. Also, the recipe calls for garlic and ginger. I don't have ginger, but I do have plenty of garlic, and I'll just have to do without the ginger. But next time I will try the ginger to see if it enhances the flavor. I'll start by crushing the garlic cloves because it makes it easier to peel that skin off. I'll start by mincing the garlic, and there was a lot of substitutions that I made in the recipe. Like, for instance, I said the flank steak. I'm using actually the type of beef that you would use in a stir fry or maybe even fajitas. Flank steak is a very good piece of beef, and when you cut it at an angle and you slice it very thin. So it is a difference. But my recipe turned out just as nice, but I do believe if I had used the flank steak, cut thinly sliced, it would have been a lot more tender than the stir fry beef that I used. But hey, that's what I had on hand, so that's what I used. So, mincing the garlic, and the recipe called for lots of fresh ingredients: uh, the fresh garlic, fresh ginger, and I will just have to do without the ginger, but next time I definitely will try the ginger in the recipe. I'm going to marinate the steak now by using fresh ground peppers. I had peppercorns in my cabinet, so I just took out my little grinder and I used that to freshly ground these peppercorns. I wanted to follow the instructions in the recipe so I can just have a better experience with the recipe by following the instructions, but I did have to make a lot of substitutions. Now, marinating the meat using the fresh ground pepper, then half of the garlic. The other half will go in the stir frying of the vegetables. So I'm going to save the other half of the garlic. The next ingredient is soy sauce. This is Kikkoman's. I love Kikkoman's soy sauce. I've tried other brands and it just didn't cut the mustard. So I do have my Kikkoman's soy sauce. And I'll tell you another thing, I'm not using the exact measurements. Sometimes you just have to eyeball it. Now, this is another ingredient that I was not familiar with using: honey. This is just regular grocery store honey, but in the recipe that I saw, she used pure honey. Like I said, I'm making a lot of substitutions. I was afraid that the honey would make it overly sweet, but it did not. It actually turned out very good. It did not make the pepper steak too sweet at all. It enhanced the flavor. The next ingredient was supposed to be chicken seasoning. And I do have chicken seasoning in my cabinet, but you can also substitute with an all-purpose seasoning. And remember, I'm telling you, I'm eyeballing these measurements. I'm not using the exact measurements that was in the recipe. I'm just kind of eyeballing it. And if you're experienced with cooking, you know what you can do and what you can get away with. And I'm also using an all-purpose seasoning out of my cabinet instead of the chicken seasoning. Now the next ingredient is cornstarch. Now the cornstarch in a marinade on beef using cornstarch. If you have thinly sliced beef, the cornstarch, it coats the meat, so when you stir fry it, it actually has a layer on there which helps the meat cook faster and makes it more tender. And I've seen people using the cornstarch on a marinade many times. So you use the cornstarch, it will coat the meat. Then you have the olive oil that acts as a binder. So basically, all your seasonings that you placed in the bowl, that olive oil will lock in the moisture. Also, the cornstarch does that too. It locks the moisture into the meat by coating it. And the olive oil, coating it with the olive oil, that also locks in moisture. And when you go to stir fry the meat, it's going to keep it moist and also keep it from sticking. It adds, sometimes you need that oil. I'm just mixing everything together, making sure it's well coated. And then I'm going to sit this aside. It's going to marinate for about maybe 20 to 30 minutes, not long, 20 to 30 minutes. So I'm going to put this in the refrigerator to keep it cool. And then I'll start on the other half of the recipe, which is chopping up your veggies. The slurry. A cornstarch slurry, is for the gravy that goes on the pepper steak. A slurry is when you use water and cornstarch. And not only will I use the water and cornstarch, but this recipe calls for the freshly ground black pepper and soy sauce. That slurry is used as a thickening agent when you're making anything that has a gravy to it. And I use cornstarch slurry in a number of my recipes when I need something to thicken up a broth or thicken a gravy. And then the fresh ground pepper. I want to be totally honest. I took a little liberty. I always, if I feel like something needs a little extra kick of whatever, I will add it. Sometimes I may not tell you that when I'm doing these recipes, but I may say that I added a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but I'm going to make it taste the way I want it to taste. So that's the slurry. It's basically cornstarch, water, cornstarch, ground pepper, and soy sauce. And I'm not afraid to taste things. I'm not afraid to taste. I'm not going to do anything dangerous or taste something that's raw that could be dangerous. But with this, I just wanted to make sure it was well seasoned because this is going to be the gravy, the coating to your pepper steak. yes, I took this time to collect the seeds from this Jupiter bell pepper. You can dry those seeds out and grow more peppers. You know that, right? So I took the time. I do that with a lot of my vegetables. I did it with my cucumbers. I did it with my okra. I saved the seeds. I did it with my red kidney beans. I plan on doing it with my tomatoes also. So yes, I'm going to regrow these peppers. And this is a nice bell pepper. This is Jupiter. I grew several different varieties, but this Jupiter turned out real nice. So this pepper is the inspiration behind this meal that I'm making today. When cooking the steak, I started with a really high heat. You want the marinade that you used with the honey and the seasoning and the cornstarch, you want it to caramelize on the meat. So you want to sear it so it gives it a really nice texture, and then it will also caramelize. The next step, I'm going to start with a clean skillet and some fresh olive oil. It's time to fry the veggies. That's your peppers and your onions. Now, I will tell you one thing I did do. When I started with a hot skillet, but it may have been a little too hot because when you're cooking your garlic, if you see that it begins to brown, and that's what happened in this case. I noticed that the skillet was a little too high and the garlic began to brown too soon. When you burn your garlic, it gives it a bitter taste. So I quickly introduced the vegetables and turned the skillet down to keep the garlic from burning, and that worked. I also added salt and pepper to the vegetables. The next step is to add your slurry. But I will tell you one thing about the vegetables. You cook them to your desired texture. If you want your peppers to be have a little crunch to it, then you don't cook them long. But I, for one, I like my vegetables to soften just a little, so I cook them a little longer. But if you like that crunch, you don't cook your onions and your bell peppers long. Now I'm going to introduce the slurry, which is your cornstarch and water mixture. You'll see that will begin to thicken almost immediately. And I noticed that. And I felt like it was getting too thick too fast. And it basically all the liquid evaporated. So what I had to do is add some more water. See, you can see that it's thickening already. Now it looks good. It's making a really nice coating, but it's too thick and it's not enough liquid. You need that extra liquid. So this is going to go over your rice or your noodles. So you need a bit of a gravy. So you add the meat and you're going to continue to stir it together. But what I had to do, because the coating became too thick too soon, I added more water. I introduced more liquid to the slurry because you want a bit of a gravy. It has a great flavor. You serve this over rice. You can serve it over noodles. I actually had it both ways. I served it over chow mein, which is a soft noodle, and I also had it over rice. It was actually very good. So I'm going to introduce water, but when I do, I had an electric kettle with warm water already available, so I added hot water. You don't want to introduce something cold when you're cooking something and it's at a high heat. If you introduce something cold, it's going to bring your temperature down. So I actually added hot water from my kettle, and that worked perfectly. It never stopped cooking because I didn't introduce cold water into the skillet. I added hot water. So I added as much as I felt that I needed to loosen up that gravy. So here's the finished